I don't even understand how someone could make a title so ready for me to jump into. Linus Torvalds, C versus Rust debate has religious undertones. It's so good. Just accept Rust as your memory savior. Linus Torvalds addressing the growing tension between C and Rust developers in the Linux kernel community, highlighting the culture clash and technical challenges as the two languages coexist in kernel development. For those that do not know, I think that a lot of this has spawned from a recent presentation in which someone only got 3 slides through or 4 slides through the Rust side and was just absolutely accosted wildly trying to present their opinions on Rust. But what people don't tell you, which I learned about later, is that this happens to every presentation, apparently, at Rust. Or not at Rust, at LinuxCon. So I was talking with a maintainer, a core maintainer of Linux, and he's just like, this happens every single time. I don't know what I went to my first one like 20 years ago, and I was completely shocked that they got nowhere through the presentation. So for us to be able to look at this and say, oh, it's absolutely the worst thing you've ever seen, I think it might be slightly overstating it. This might just be Linux core developers in general. And where this probably stems from, which makes perfect sense, is that culture flows from the top. Culture is maintained by the boots and the leaders on the ground, but culture flows from the top. That's typically how it looks. It's kind of a weird symbiotic relationship, because if your entire boots on the ground changes, then the culture from the top tends to get overthrown. If the culture on top keeps on influencing the boots on the ground and the people just doing all the work, then it tends to get stronger and stronger. And Torvalds is known for being, let's just say, a very outspoken individual when it comes to giving feedback. Torvalds calls it, to make matters worse, commit whatever is clearly totally and utter crap, even if it didn't break the applications, right? So this is Torvalds telling somebody that their update to one of the utilities returning an eno-ent is actually completely invalid from IO control, because IO control should have a file. And so he's just like, your push is total crap. Your opinions are crap. Just crap, right? So culture flows from the top. Is it shocking that a presentation has been utterly dominated by people saying things are complete crap? No, it should not be. It just really shouldn't be. This should be par for the course. And if anyone hopes for something else to happen, I think you're just kind of, you're coping. C and Rust contributors to the Linux kernel have run into a collision course, erupting a controversy that Linus, Linux's creator, describes as having almost religious war undertones. During today's Open Source Summit keynote here, Torvalds said that while the controversy involves healthy arguments, some are becoming very negative. And that's good. I think the thing is Linus also is really into healthy arguments, at least his version of healthy. And maybe this is his version of healthy confrontation. But I think a lot of people struggle to know where healthy and unhealthy starts and begins, especially in the most bike-shedding group of people ever, which is kernel development. The contention between the two camps erupt when one of the kernel maintainers, who is a C programmer, quit over non-technical nonsense involving in adapting a C plugin for Rust. Torvalds likened the controversy to Vi users versus Emacs culture wars, over which was the superior text editor, also known as the editor wars. There's something very interesting about the editor wars that I just want to comment on really quickly. Bill Joy created Vi in 1976. He then later joined Emacs, claiming that Emacs actually was, in fact, a superior text editing experience. I mean, he's wrong, but it did happen. And for those that don't understand why Vi and Emacs was such a controversial thing, at one point you had to pay for Emacs. It was real. It was very hard. And so, like, the editor wars were real. Vi represented this free and open version, and Emacs was the paid big text editor, akin today. Big Emacs, classic Big Emacs. Anyways, I think I actually enjoy it. I enjoy arguments. I think one of the nice parts about Rust has been how it's livened up some of the discussions and some of the arguments get nasty. I think it shows how much people care. At the same time, I'm not quite so sure why Rust has been such a contentious area, Torvalds said. It reminds me of when I was young and people were arguing about Vi versus Emacs, but for some reason, the whole Rust versus C discussion has taken almost religious undertones in certain areas. When it comes to Rust versus C, it hits this very interesting area, which I think hits the same group of people, but in unique ways. With C, you your expertise tree, right? Because we all get perk trees in life. Every language you use has perk trees, right? And if you perk up hard enough and you go down your entire skill tree and you get all the way to the maximum level at C, you have designed your programming style around control down to the absolute bit for every last little bit of information. Like you just perked out of your mind. Whereas Rust, it has a very similar sized perk tree, right? Very, very just you're upgrading left and right. You're doing all sorts of stuff. But the only difference here is that at the end of its line is complete and utter type masturbation, whereas this one's control masturbation, right? And so Rust derives control through types. Rust derives control through manual controls. And these two cannot live on the same island. They're just impossible to live on. And so this is authoritarian and this is anarchy. And so it's like you can't have those two live on the same island. They just don't want to. They don't want to play with each other. They just can't. And so it's religious, it's political, it's philosophical. I won't even put it as religious. I think Linus doesn't quite understand what this term means. I think what he really means is philosophical overtones. And philosophical, so for those that don't know, there's the four circles of living. There's all the way deep down. There's like your relationship with man and just like fellow human beings, community. And then there's political. Then there's anthropological. And then there is you and God, right? So this would be the theological side. This is anthropological. This is philosophical. And this is community. And so all these kind of flow downwards. Your view from the top influences each one of your views downwards. And so it's really in the philosophical, political kind of ring, one could argue. And so that's really where this argument's coming from, is that your view on what is good and safe, right? Yeah, but it's authoritarian because it protects you from yourself. Exactly. But you can see why that doesn't work, right? You can see why that does not work when it comes to C devs, because you can't put them together, right? One argues for complete freedom. The other one argues freedom through authority. One argues freedom through chaos. The other one argues freedom through authority. It's impossible for those two, I think, these two groups to really get together and agree. It's extremely difficult. But I love this, by the way. Can we just take a moment and just appreciate Linus right here? C being defined as chaos is wild. Well, C is chaos because anyone can do anything at any point. Well, that's the definition of chaos, right? Chaos is that at any point I can do anything at any point. Or anarchy might be a better term. Maybe chaos is not great. Maybe anarchy is a better term for it. It's actual anarchy because anyone at any point can do anything. And so therefore it's more wild. Chaos, emote only mode. If C has chaos, what is JavaScript? JavaScript is just abstract chaos, right? JavaScript just allows you to be able to express with fewer words. It has more dense symbolic meaning and ease of use. So you can actually create anything you want. And I'm not saying that's bad or good. I'm just saying it's real. I really don't like synonymizing anarchy and chaos. They're really not the same concept. Blah, 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 blah. I think one needs to only look at anarchy in practice to realize that it is, in fact, very chaotic. Anyways, so you get the idea. You get the idea that I just don't. That's how I look at this argument, is that I fully agree that it has a intense undertone because it has two different philosophies colliding. It's going to be very, very hard. And then you take people which also have a culture that arguments are good and you should have it, and you have two different philosophies. You want to guess what's happening? It's crazy. Culture clash. At the issue is a culture clash between C language and the Rust language when it comes to submitting changes across language boundaries. Modifying something that's a C interface on behalf of Rust, people might make sense from the Rust point of view, and vice versa, while C people seek Rust contributions to plug into C. And I think, again, this also makes a lot of sense because C is the dominant one. C is the one that is the bedrock right now. And so for Rust to be like, hey, you need to change for me, versus C saying, hey, you need to change for me, it makes sense why C point of view is currently winning. I'm not saying it's good. And operating systems is one of the perfect arguments for why Rust is good. It is hands down probably the most perfect argument you could make. But still, I understand this as well. What do you want? What do you want? You want all those 40, 50 years of C experience just to simply go, now we'll just let Rust, we'll let the new guys just come in and just do whatever they need to do. No, they're trying to defend also the operating system itself, right? Yes, a C is respect to your elders. Rust is the future is now, old man. Exactly. That actually might be the best way. Honestly, this could be like, this is literally the best way to put it. C is like respect your elders. Rust is screw you, dad. All right. For example, the famous buffer overflow hacks or vulnerabilities that could be generated with C and a CPU now have become almost outdated. While Rust offers capped certain security features and drawbacks, it's also much harder to learn compared to C, which is easier to grasp. C is most certainly easier to grasp. Fair and factual. You could read the entirety of C and its specification in a single day. There's nothing about it that would be intense. Earlier this month, Miguel, my dad used to call me Miguel. I always appreciated that. That was my name when I was a kid, Miguel. Wrote in a message that he was removing himself as a maintainer of Rust for the Linux project. Oh, was this, we read this message. Yeah, I am retiring from the project. Almost after 4 years, I find myself lacking the energy and enthusiasm I once had to respond to some of the non-technical nonsense. So it's best to leave it up to those who still have it in them. Again, like I said, I think this is a culture moment from the top. I too really, 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 really struggle with just constant arguments about what is best. It doesn't really, it does not fill my cup. I do not get happy when I read that. I get really anxious when that happens, if that makes sense. I know some people that love the fight. I personally just don't. I've never loved the fight. I get just so anxious and I get so just over it. Because at some point it doesn't matter for me. I'm also not building, to be completely fair though, I'm also not building an operating system. Everything that I'm building, if there's a problem, we're just going to have to fix that problem. The circular arguments bore me to death. Yeah, exactly. Honestly, they need something more important to fight about. Maybe that's true. I wish all the success to the project, but I truly believe the future of kernels is with memory-safe languages. I am no visionary, but if Linux doesn't internalize this, I'm afraid some other kernel will do to it what it did to Unix. I don't know what Linux did to Unix to win the war, but is it possible for that to even... I guess in some sense, in today's modern world with Docker, is it effectively possible? Like these Docker type environments where it's just like, it was FOSS, Unix was closed. Okay. But that's different, right? That's a much different argument. That's the whole Vi versus Emacs argument. Vi and Emacs is free versus paid, which makes perfect sense. Yeah, it's much, much different. Sun Microsystems was late to open Solaris, yeah. Real talk, do you think that in the next 10 years, if a great, I think it's Redux OS, do you think that there is a possibility that a Linux-like compatible operating system that is written in Rust can actually overtake Linux? Old Man Judo is someone actually I want to listen to. He has a lot of experience in this. Linux is just a kernel. The whole argument is silly because the real problem is all of the user space C. That's a really good point. In other words, not only would they have to write the entire Linux side of everything, they would also have to then write all the C side of things as well. Wait, hold on. Did Old Man Judo just hit me with, I would like to interject for a second, what you're referring to as Linux is in fact GNU/Linux, or as I've recently been taking it as, or I've recently been saying it as GNU plus Linux? Did you just hit me with that? I might have. I'm pretty sure you just did that to me. I'm not even sure what to do with this information right now. That was actually probably my favorite interaction I think I've ever had in my entire lifetime. And do not break user space. Do not break user space. Replacing the kernel with Rust would only remove LPEs, which is cool, but way less important. What is LPEs for us uninitiated security folk, low-level learning, and us uninitiated kernel people? Local priv escalation. Okay, so like when you ask something and then someone defines it by saying the word again, so it's user to root. Like, is this effectively like the SSH bugs, where given once every 10,000 tries on 100 concurrent connections on modern SSH, going back to older versions of SSH servers, you're able to then accidentally get privileged access as a regular user. Is that what you're trying to say, LPEs? Normally, they're a lot less contrived. Look up Dirty Cow from 2017. Sneaky sudo. A privilege escalation vulnerability in the Linux kernel. Oh, okay. A race condition was found in the Linux kernel memory subsystem handle on copy on write. Cow, breakage of private read-only memory mappings. An unprivileged local user could use this flaw to gain write access to otherwise read-only memory mappings. Oh, okay. Cow. Sweet. That's awesome. It's called Dirty Cow. What a great name. Holy cow. Anyways, divided schools. Meanwhile, the two C and Rust schools are largely divided. There are people who just like the notion of Rust and having Rust encroach on their area. Or hold on. There's people who don't like the notion of Rust and having Rust encroach on their area. People have even talked about the Rust integration being a failure. I've mentioned that I don't think so. We've been doing this for a couple years now, so it's way too early to even say that. Torvald said, but I also think even if we're to become a failure, and I don't think we will, that's how you learn. So I see the outreach thing as positive, even if the arguments are unnecessary, always so. Are not necessarily always so. Okay. One thing I do think is really interesting, and I think the main contention really breaks down to that one guy, Ted, who made all these comments at the presentation. Really, this is where it all breaks down, and accused the Rust side of being religious, which could be very interesting. Maybe they both also are, in some sense, religious here. But I do think what he said was very interesting, which is loading all the semantics into a type system is still a fairly untested world. And he is right. I know all the functional programmers will argue with me and tell me I'm wrong and why actually all these things are good. I get it. I'm on your team. But at the exact same time, there's very few functional projects and Rust projects of large scale out there. There's a lot more C, C++, Java, even Zig is starting to catch up of large-sized projects. And so, fuck you specifically, Ted. Yes, I believe that was the exact verbiage. And so, yeah, Firefox gave up on Servo. So it is difficult. What about Go? Go would fall into the non-semantic overloading. Or the high semantic amounts. Wait, there's large projects in Zig? Yeah. Bun, Ghosty, Tiger Beetle. Those are all big projects. I also want to say that I don't think all of the user space C is really a problem. I think Rust will manage to cause just as many critical problems as C if you give it a chance. Yeah, there's a whole area of problems that still exist with Rust. You can still just make bad semantic understanding of your code. Like, I've created multiple memory leaks in Rust. It's easy. You forget to clear out a hash map. Stupid still exists in all programming worlds. Like, no matter how much you don't want it to, it just simply exists. It's the AAA game problem. Anyone can make a new indie game, but the scope and scale of the Linux kernel is going to take decades to replace because of how many different corners there are, as well as the drive. Yeah, this is actually really great. This is a very great analogy. Very, very good. Zig would have been a better choice. Generally speaking, I think Zig would have been a better choice, just because the C people won't hate it, because you can write it just like C, and you can treat it just like C. You can actually do NeoPeg, which is voiced star. You can do C-style pointers. You can do unsafe pointer. You can do it all. You can treat it just like C. And Zig interops with C perfectly well, right? So there's a lot of really good stuff when it comes to Zig. And so I think Zig is probably a better opportunity. It's just Zig is too immature. Zig is not growing as fast. I don't think Zig is going, is Zig going to actually happen in the mainstream heavily? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. Yeah, you can make progress immediately by adding Zig to C. You need eons of conflicts to get Rust and C to play. Yeah, that's because Zig fundamentally, in our little culture diagram, Zig is like right here, right? Like Zig is the middle ground. Oh, you want an option for this specific thing? You can have an option. Oh, you want a result object? You can have a result object. Oh, you don't want it? Hey, I'm not here to tell you how to live your life. I will just give you the tools to be more safe if you want to, right? As a C person, I disagree. Also, the kernel drivers are a big deal for type checking help. That's why I think Zig, I still think Zig is likely one of the best ones. In my opinion, it's the opposite. Linux didn't start with the purpose of competing with Wait, hold on. Linux didn't start with the purpose of competing with Unix, is what I assume. It started as a hobby project. It did, but correctly written. Over time, it grew in size and functionality. A browser shouldn't start with the idea of competing with Chrome. I think a browser fundamentally has to start with the idea of competing with Chrome at this current moment. I mean, I think at one point in one day, this was true. I don't know if that's true anymore. What I mean is that back in the day, there wasn't a lot of operating system availability. And so having a nice feature complete operating system probably made a lot of sense, and that's why people were able to adopt it and use it so well. It'd be hard for me to believe it the other way. Ladybird, but Ladybird still competes against Chrome, right? Ladybird fundamentally has to compete against Chrome now because Chrome is free and it constantly tries to get you to use it, and Google controls search. So when you search up Ladybird, how much do you want to bet Chrome shows up on search? I think what they meant is that the end goal is to not compete, is to make something. That is fine and dandy, but that doesn't. When you're talking about making an operating system, which takes many people and many years, it's really hard to do anything other than to compete. Like, I get if you just want to rewrite find to be something a little bit nicer, fair and factual. But that does not mean, like, you don't have to compete against find. But when it comes to something larger, it's extremely difficult. At first, it should be secure. It's hobby contributors more than its users. I'm not sure what that means. That's what Ladybird is doing. Yeah, I guarantee you, Ladybird's biggest competition is Chrome. I know you're saying they don't have any sort of competition, but they have to. Features of Chrome will dictate things Ladybird does. By necessary, it will. Right? If Chrome adds a feature that everybody likes, Ladybird will start getting requests to add that. Like, I don't see how you can't in this day and age. At one point when there was, Unix wasn't, right? But that's what competition is. So what? That literally is what it is. Competition is where you are competing for the same market. Safari doesn't care, and very few people use Safari. Mac books are not the majority of people. Okay, it's only the majority. It's only a large. It's a large amount within the developer community. Safari is the new IE. Everyone hates Safari. Developers hate Safari. That doesn't make it a good thing, right? The challenge with competing is that it turns you a lot like your competitors and you stop playing your advantages. This is true. Resisting that is the hard part. That's fair. I like this take, Dax. I don't know why you're considered suspicious. What did you do to be suspicious? But I like that take. It's true. Because there's reason. Typically why something is created is because you look at what is available and you don't like what is available. Linux is not the standard. It's the unusual. Operating systems is most certainly an unusual thing to create into a large-scale affair. When you're creating a browser, because any of these things require an enormous amount of effort. How many operating systems have been created and thrown away? Dax literally assaulted an innocent young woman from a Lambo by throwing something at her head. He's sus AF. He did. I saw it. In fact, I even have it on recording. I'm the most prosecuted man on the planet. That's because you don't know how to spell Dax. DXR is really frustrating to most people. Hey, kid! Yeah. Anyways, we'll go on. I think we'll probably... I don't think we'll ever see eye to eye on this one, it sounds like. And I'm okay. Maybe, hey, you know what? I'm fine being wrong on this one. But at the same time, I don't think I'm wrong. I think that most people write, like today, Ladybird was specifically written because Chrome did not do the thing they wanted it to do. They are presenting an alternative view of the world because they are trying to, that's fundamentally competition in my book. Like, absolutely fundamental. I'm okay being wrong because I know I'm right. Yeah, I know I'm right. Like, unless you can present to me that Ladybird did this because they're just one day they woke up and said, you know what, I'm just going to spin a wheel, randomly select some things, and it just accidentally happened to be that. They started happened to be that, and that's it, right? I just don't believe it. Yeah, most people use one browser. Yeah, I know it's weird to use more than one browser. Either you're a web developer or not. Have you been into Quant? No. Yes, I have. I've played around with Quant a little bit. Okay, I've played around with that. If prototyping antithesis gains traction, it becomes competition by default. Yes. Thank you, Judo. This is This is what I'm trying to say without all the fancy words, okay? I ain't that eloquent of a man. I can't say words like antithesis, gains, or traction, okay? The challenge is the idea that memory-safe architecture makes certain assumptions about the infrastructure, Torvald says. It's the infrastructure people who might be scared, as an example, but it has become very public. It's the infrastructure people who seem to resist some of the changes. To be fair, I mean, we've done a lot of changes to the C infrastructure too, Torvald says. The kind of code the kernel does is not optimal C. It's not just that we write things in a certain way. It's also that we have a lot of tools on the C side that enforce infrastructure rules that are not a part of the language, Torvald says. Part of this is our locking safety. We actually do have a lot of memory safety infrastructure on the C side that is not technically part of C itself. It's part of our infrastructure for the kernel, where we have debug builds that make the kernel go much slower, but they test a lot more of the memory safety stuff. Oh, very interesting. Yeah, I could see this really hurting the Rust integration because the Rust. Wait, is someone making fun of me? How did he read a normal as optimal? I don't, Dax. I can't help it. Okay, I can't read Dax. Okay, shut up. I see. Is it this one is not optimal C, normal C? Sorry, it looks like the word optimal in my brain. It looked just like the word optimal. All right. Okay. I don't know. I have no idea. I can't even help it. All right. Dang it, you got me all distracted. This is very interesting. I could see why this would cause more friction if you already have a bunch of stuff pre-built in and honestly testing harnesses and the actual, assuming that simply having a typing system is going to save you from the myriad of different memory oopsie daisies that will eventually happen throughout Rust is a little bit ridiculous. I could totally see why, I could see why there's a lot of hesitancy since they already have a lot of stuff in place to help prevent a lot of the problems. Totally see, bro. Hesitancy. Obviously, Rust and C each have their benefits, and Rust lovers offer great arguments in their favor of Rust lovers. Please never refer to me as a blank lover. In their favor, the code is good once it's compiled, more extensive, etc. Well, I mean, extensive is a unique term. And also the code is good once it's compiled is also a unique term. Again, I have written memory bugs in Rust and the code compiled just fine. You can call me a mother lover. That's fine. While Workhorse C is easier to learn and benefits from decades of use, the context applies to the very kernel-centric development of eBPF. As Liz Rice, Chief Open Source Officer, Isovalent at Cisco, told the new stack, Rust is newer and has really strong benefits, but not everybody immediately knows how to write Rust. And a lot of people who are working on eBPF subsystem in the kernel are not going to suddenly turn around and learn Rust so they can do their job, right? And learning Rust well is a very difficult thing, and I assume writing kernel code with Rust is going to be a very difficult thing. You're going to be writing a lot of unsafe Rust. You're going to be really leaning into some of the difficulties. For those that don't know, for German strings in Rust to exist, which is this really cool kind of memory optimization where you use a bit of typing to be able to have just a prefix and a heap pointer or the entire string stored locally, allowing for really fast like string comparisons instead of having to follow a second reference just to test the prefix. You can actually test the prefix within the stack. A very, very, very cool item to set the layout. Look at what you have to do. You have to do all of this layout. You also have to be able to set all this other stuff to be able to say what it's supposed to do. Like what you can do in C is just the gallons of code required to codify the semantics of the layout for German strings is significantly more lines than it is in, say, something like C. Yeah, then segfault. I don't like one-dimensional arguments. You should know this by now. I'm just saying this takes a lot of understanding of Rust underneath to be able to do all this. And look at this. Remember, this is unsafe Rust. You are taking literally mutable pointers and you're playing around with mutable pointers all over the place to make this work out. And you're doing unions in Rust, which most people don't even do. Most people don't even know that you can actually have a union type in Rust. Okay? That's unusual. You also have manual drop shared 9 bytes, right? Like it takes a lot. It takes a lot for this to happen when this just literally is, all it is a buffer that has a prefix and a potential pointer out to the heap, or the rest of the string itself based on some little bit. Like, this is a lot of code to create that. So you can see why people are worried. And I think I understand why some people are worried that it takes hundreds of lines of code that express maybe 4 lines of code in C, maybe 10 lines of code in C. Like, I see why it's difficult, right? I can see why. And so I don't like to just simply say, oh, you just got to learn Rust. It's that easy. It's like, well, there's actually there's a bit more. I'm not saying C is good. You also immediately get you every time you write C, you are pointing a gun directly at your foot. Now, the gun may never go off because you have all the right tools in place. The safety, the manual, you have a nice, good manual safety. You have an eye safety. You have a hand safety. But that doesn't mean it's going to keep on, it doesn't mean it's not going to shoot you in the foot at some point. Rice said, but I think that's not quite understanding the full purpose of eBPF verifier when people say that. You can have eBPF code written in Rust and compiled to eBPF bytecode. So if you're a Rust developer who wants to write eBPF, you can do that. As Polar Signal CEO and founder Federic told the New Stack, there are plenty of examples in Rust where you have to do some unsafe stuff, and then you build a safe abstraction on top of that. Branzik said, so I'm definitely not of the opinion that Rust is going to be the savior of everything. I'm a big Rust fan, by the way. By the way, I use Rust, by the way. But I think C is actually pretty good language to write an operating system, but Rust can do a lot of the job as well. That's pretty good. This is actually Frederick, this is actually a really good take, which is there's plenty of examples where you can't, you're going to do a lot of unsafe Rust stuff, and then you build safe abstractions on top of it. But that doesn't mean that you're somehow, this is not a get out of jail free card. I think this is a really good take. Because at the end of the day, I think Rust, if you really learn Rust, I think Rust is probably a really fun language to write, because you get to just codify so much semantics into the type system, and the ability just to really write a complete program like that has to be a good time. It just has to be. But I can also see why people don't like that. Let's see. It's hard enough to find good maintainers for a simple language such as C. Aren't we concerned that the problem is even more with Rust? I think the thing that is going to really be hard for Rust is that Rust has a C++ problem. Rust allows for many ways to solve a problem. And by having so many different ways to solve a problem, you're going to have not just expertise, but you're also going to have expertise, like vertical expertise. Like, I solve Rust problems this way. And then other people, I solve Rust problems this way. And that's going to cause a lot. Also, to be completely fair, once you've written enough Rust, you are, by bylaws of the Rust Foundation, required contractually to have your hair blue for 3 months out of the 12-month cycle. So, to be fair, you got to have some blue hair, And I think that's gonna really cause some problems, in the long run. I think they should change that rule. Yeah, it's still arguably true for C itself. Yeah, fair. You know what? At the end of the day, C and Rust require an enormous amount of expertise. And both are really hard to be great at. And I just assume it's going to be very difficult to sell from one camp to go to the other camp. I think it is just a hard sell. Some people will just do it automatically. And I think a lot of people will just I think most people won't. C has a 40-year head start, exactly. So anyways, really cool article. I think it's very interesting that Linus doesn't, I think when you look at Twitter, you see this really big vitriol and anger and screw you, Dad, all over Twitter and how bad the C maintainers are. Whereas when you hear Linus's take on it, it doesn't seem nearly as bad. He's just like, yeah, I love the energy. I love that people are so involved. And yeah, it's not the best, and we shouldn't do that. But at the same time, I'm happy that there's lively discussions, right? Like, it's a much different world than I think we're used to. It's just a much different world. Hey, the name. I still make memory problems in Rust again.